Okay, this is it. I believe I'm all live now, which is exciting news for me because this is my very first out of what is going to be a weekly Q&A live session, all things about feedback. So every Sunday, 2:30 p.m., I'll be streaming to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and answering your questions, your concern around feedback conversations. Now, every week, I'll aim to have a one theme, and then whatever questions come in between, I'll answer them. Whatever questions comes during the session, I'll also do my very best to answer them. Now, this week for the episode number 1, I choose to talk a little bit more about a different point of views that I believe managers and organizations have to take in order to improve their feedback culture and skills, because quite frankly, we are focused at the wrong end of fixing our feedback problems. The root cause is elsewhere, and because we are focused on one particular area, and that is typically how to deliver feedback, how to share feedback more effectively, we tend to focus on that one narrow end. And it reminds me the classic slow elevator problem. So if you have heard the problem, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, here's the challenge. Here's the classic elevator problem. Imagine yourself being an owner of an office building, and your tenants are complaining that the elevator is too slow. It takes too much time to travel between floors. And some of the tenants are already threatening you with moving away from your office or breaking the lease. How do you solve that problem? How do you approach that problem? How do you fix this problem? When for the first time I heard this problem, and I'm guessing majority of the people very quickly are jumping to solving what it seems to be the obvious one. Well, if the elevator is slow, let's just make it faster, and that will solve the problem. And since we've already labeled the problem and we know that the elevator is slow, and you're going to fix the pace of the elevator, the solutions are limited. You can change the motor, you can maybe upgrade the software, maybe you can build a whole new elevator. Those are the solutions, and yes, you'll fix the problem, very expensive and time consuming. And what's important here is that most of us are trapped in that quick pattern of spotting the problem, labeling it, and jumping into solution mode. Very much what we're trying to do with feedback conversation. If you're an individual manager who wants to improve feedback skills, perhaps you do the same thing. Well, if I need to get better at feedback, providing feedback, then this is what I'll focus on feedback delivery. And yes, whilst it is a solution, it's not the only solution. And to really get into the root cause problem of why feedback creates so much pressure, tension, and even stress, we have to approach it from a completely different angle, look at it from a holistic point of view. And here's what I mean by that. The solution here is very much like with the lift. So yes, initially we are going to fix it by changing the motor, but there is a different solution, a better problem to solve, which is not as expensive and not as time consuming. What if instead of fixing the pace of the elevator, you focus on the perceived experience whilst people using the elevator? What if you just add mirrors into the elevator itself? What if you put some music in there? Or perhaps it's very 2021, right? Put some sanitizers before the elevator. It will all add a small distractions that would change the perception of when you're using the elevator, right? So it's a different solution, very much like with the feedback. We have to step back and stop focusing on, I need to deliver feedback better. Raf, how do I provide feedback better? How do I share feedback so I don't upset people? How do I do it effectively? How do I deliver that feedback effectively? And from then on, you're either focusing on solving that problem or improving your feedback delivery skills, or your entire organization is focused and delivering the training only that is so focused and pinpoint on feedback delivery. The only difference between slow elevator problem and feedback and fixing your feedback challenges is that the fact that you have to focus on feedback delivery is always going to be an element of it, but it shouldn't have been the main one and the only one. And here's what I mean by that. If we are so focused on feedback delivery, then let me ask you this question. Imagine yourself that there's a feedback waiting for you, and that particular piece of feedback will be delivered by two different people. Now, that feedback is of high value to you. It's going to help you overcome one of your biggest challenges, obstacles, improve significantly. And here's the thing, here's the twist. That particular feedback will be delivered by two different people. Now, one that you like and you trust, and the other that you don't really get along with. You don't really trust that person just yet. And my question to you is this. Can you honestly say that you're going to engage with both people equally? That you're going to receive this feedback, you're going to listen and engage with it on equal measure? If you're like most people, then the answer is no. I know I wouldn't, and I haven't met yet just a person that would say, of course I would. Doesn't matter who is the person that shares the feedback with me, I would always absorb it. Now, it makes sense, right? We can all agree that we need feedback, and it doesn't really matter where it comes from. If it helps me, I need it. Yes, we do that, and we can agree on that. There's no question about it. But there's something happening as soon as we are part of feedback experience, as soon as we are having the feedback conversation. What changes now is the relationship that we have with the person, is the level of the trust that is between me and you, is how do I perceive your intention right in the moment and for you as a leader on the broader scale. So my advice to you guys is, and what I would like to really introduce you and encourage you to do, is to start looking at solving your feedback challenges, whatever they are, with a more holistic approach. Let's just park to the side the fact that we have to improve how we deliver the feedback. I've mentioned that is going to be part of our strategy, and it will, but let's just park it to the side and look at things differently and apply the principle of the slow elevator problem. Is there a different problem to solve? Is there a better problem to solve? Where if we are going to stay within that question, would you engage with the feedback equally from two different people, one that you trust, one you don't? You can see that the problem is slightly different. What we really have to focus and change is our relationship with the feedback conversation, how we perceive a feedback experience, right? Our past experiences, unfortunately, contributing to how we are perceiving a feedback. So when you are about to receive feedback, you're a little bit nervous, a little bit agitated. When you are, hold on, maybe there's some message, something going on with my, nope. Okay, so if you are on that receiving end, you're a little bit nervous and agitated. If somebody is using a feedback sandwich, shares something positive, what you do is then to wait for that negative part to drop in. Maybe it's your turn to deliver a challenging feedback to your employees, and the same thing happens. You're a little bit nervous and anxious. How are you going to do that? And so when we look at it from this perspective, we have to address our relationship with the feedback. We have to change the goal and objective. Is there a better objective in 2021 that I can focus on in order to create healthy and engaging feedback culture? The answer is yes. What if your objective for this year, or maybe for this quarter only, would be rather than improving how we provide feedback, how we share the feedback, let's just change the objective into changing our relationship with feedback, or peeling off that negative label that feedback has right now. If that's your goal, then all of a sudden, just like with the slow elevator problem, the solutions are different. You're starting looking at different points, at different things in order to improve and create healthier and better feedback conversations in your workplace. And here are the few things that you can do. Remember, we parked away how to provide a feedback. We're gonna create a healthier and more engaging feedback culture by focusing elsewhere. And here are a few things you can do. You can focus your next few months, your strategy on receiving feedback. As an individual, as a manager, if you are starting to receiving feedback well, you are responding to feedback or to people's opinion differently, you're a lot more open to it. And what you're doing is number one, you're sending a clear message to your people that here feedback is safe. You're also sending a message that I can take it before I dish it out, which is important. Remember at the beginning, guys, I mentioned about the perception. How do you perceive the intention of the person who shares the feedback? And we judge it through in the moment, how the feedback is delivered, but we also judge it through our existing relationship and past feedback experiences with that particular manager. That doesn't mean we only filter it very quickly through how did you deliver it in the last several times, but also how do you respond to feedback when I'm sharing feedback with you? Okay, what's your intention here? Are you here to do your job as a manager and just to command and control? Are you actually here to help me on the human level? So receiving feedback would be one of those things, one of your strategies. Now, of course, when you get better at receiving feedback, you also grow at a quicker pace. And why it's so important? Well, if you're a manager, I'm guessing you're experiencing the same thing that I was when I was the manager a while ago. There seems to be a notion that the higher you go, the lesser feedback comes your way, almost as if you've got it all figured out, that you don't need the feedback. That badge, I'm the manager, solves all the problems and you have all the answers. We don't. We need to grow. We are still feedback savvy, growth savvy, right? We want to move forward with our lives. But the feedback seems to be scarce. Now, the better you are at receiving the feedback, in a few instances where it happens, the more likely people will bring feedback to you. Another point here is that there is always value within the feedback. But just because the feedback was delivered badly, or we think it was delivered badly, it doesn't mean that there wasn't value within that feedback. It just means that the value is deeply hidden behind our emotional response to it. So our job is to move past that emotional response, detach ourselves differently from how we respond to the feedback emotionally, and then extract the feedback from it, the value from the feedback towards it. So getting better at receiving feedback is one of the strategies. Number two, and perhaps one of the most powerful and so important in 2021, I believe, because we had shit 2020. Let's face it, there was loads of negative in it. So I encourage you and I advise you to focus your next few months on positive feedback. Positive feedback is one of the most powerful coaching tool out there that you can use as a manager, and yet one of the most underutilized tool at the same time. By doubling down on sharing positive feedback, you will see a huge shift in which your employees responding to feedback differently. Because here's the trick for you as a manager. If your goal as a manager is to improve the feedback culture within your team, it doesn't matter whether it's a team of 2, team of 4, team of 15. If your goal is to improve feedback culture within that team, your goal, one of your main goals and targets is to create more positive feedback experiences. And what I mean by that is not that necessarily it needs to be a positive feedback to be shared. That's part of it. What I mean by that is we need to focus on a feedback experience, a perception of the feedback experience in that moment. Just like with a slow elevator problem, when we shift the focus away from the pace of the elevator towards how the pace being perceived, the experience being perceived, we solve the problem. If we take the same thing into the feedback world and you start sharing positive feedback in a more meaningful way, all of the sudden, let me just drop in on the comments, all of the sudden, you are going to focus elsewhere. Positive feedback will help you do exactly that, create more positive feedback experiences. But at the same time, if you are using receiving feedback as your tool to achieve exactly that, same thing applies. If somebody is coming forward to you and sharing feedback with you and you are receiving it well, you open to it, you listen to it, you've just created another positive feedback experience that slowly counters and balances the past negatives one. Your job is to be consistent with it and finding different opportunities and moments where you can do exactly that. create more positive feedback experiences. And so if you choose to use positive feedback as your tool, as your main focus point over the next 3 months, and you're going to do it in a very meaningful way, in a strategic way, what you're going to see is you're going to see how everyone slowly shifts the relationship with feedback from that negative, from assuming the negative one, towards the positive. Now, you may think, well, my intention is good. I don't mean any harm to my team. When I share the feedback, I want to help them. And I absolutely understand that. And I believe you. We all have that good intention when we share the feedback. But perception is the king. How in the real time feedback is being perceived and how your intention is being perceived, whether it is in the moment or not contributing, adding the experiences in the past, feedback experiences in the past, will contribute to the overall picture, to the overall feedback engagement in the moment. Just like I said, if the valuable feedback is being shared by someone that you don't really get along with, you will tend to respond to it differently than we would when the feedback is coming from the person that we really trust and respect. So positive feedback is another strategy, good strategy to use in 2021 to change the perception that we have about the feedback, to help you have people entering feedback conversation in that receptive state rather than defensive, right? So when you hear, hey, I have some feedback for you, immediately we go, whoa, what's wrong? What have I done wrong? What's the bad news? We are assuming almost every single time that it's going to be something negative. Use positive feedback to override that initial response to the feedback from this, ooh, I better be careful, I need to watch out, into, right, what's the lesson here? What's the feedback all about? And the last one is requesting feedback. Hugely important. I already mentioned that the higher you go as a manager, the lesser the feedback is. The feedback is scarce towards you, with you. People don't tend to share the feedback as much as you wish and hope to get, right? Learning and mastering the skill of requesting feedback is another good strategy, because when you request it in the right way, you are going to create another positive feedback experience, versus if you're not going to do it in the right way, you're going to create a negative feedback experience. To give an example, here's what I mean by that. Imagine yourself, I finished this live stream and I'm asking you for feedback, or perhaps your manager delivered a presentation in front of everyone else, the session is finished, and a person approaches to you, or I'm approaching you, and I say, hey, how was my session? I've requested for the feedback. I really want to know, I really want to learn. I'm curious to hear what's your opinions, what's your thoughts, what your feelings about my presentation. If my request is so vague, how was my presentation? Here's what's really happening in a split second. Very quickly, you have to figure it out what it is that I need. Because how's my session is so vague, it's so broad. And because typically we tend to play safe, we don't want to upset you, we don't want to share the feedback that you don't want to hear, or maybe we don't want to focus on an area that you don't need to be focused on, then we tend to play safe. And so most of the time, when you ask that question, how was my session? How was my delivery? What you'll get is a vague response. It was good. I liked it. I enjoyed it. Maybe at first, it's going to feel good. It's going to be, wow, that's nice. I've put so much work and effort into it, and they say they liked it. When you do it second time and you get the same response, it doesn't have any more the same impact, right? Because number one, the feedback was vague. And the question then is, how do you learn from it? The answer is, you don't. It only makes you feel comfortable in that time, but you don't grow from it. But what you also do, coincidentally and probably unknowingly, is you're creating another negative feedback experience to someone else, because you're making them figure it out what it is that you need. And they feel a little bit agitated, a little bit nervous. Therefore, it's another feedback conversation that I'm part of that didn't feel comfortable, didn't feel right. And so if we label something as uncomfortable, not right, what we tend to do is to find a quick ways to move back into comfortable. And what's the best way around the feedback conversation? Well, unfortunately, it starts with, let's avoid feedback conversations altogether. If feedback conversation is going to be uncomfortable, let's delay it. let's not share it maybe. Let's hope that things will get better. And if we are part of that feedback conversation, how can we do it and navigate it in the quickest possible way so we escape that feeling of being uncomfortable and move into being comfortable again? We treasure comfort. And so if you ask me, how was my session? And I feel a little bit uncomfortable, not sure what you want, the easiest and the fastest way for me to feel comfortable again is say, yes, it was really good. I enjoyed it. You did a great job. You don't learn. And I'm just having another feedback experience that I don't really appreciate. And it's just one extra instance when it's that negative one. So instead, what you want to do is you want to be more specific with what you want. What you want to do is you want to take away that part when I have to figure it out, work out quickly what it is that you want. So in other words, you got to be clear what it is that you want. Focus on one area, one specific skill or two specific skills, or share the outcome that you wanted to work towards. So they know, oh, right, what you're asking me, Raf, is your pace of talk. So I often use it as an example myself because I tend to speak fast, especially when I'm excited about something, passionate, and feedback and coaching is something I'm hugely passionate about it. And what I tend to do is I tend to speak fast then, but I need to focus on it because what I want is to get my message across to you. So if I say, hey, how was my session? It's very uncomfortable for you to figure out what it is that I want. If I come and say, hey, I'm working on my pace of talk, were there any moments when I was talking too fast? Or were there any moments where you couldn't quite catch what it is that I was talking about? And you can say, yeah, actually, on that part, I wasn't clear. Was it because of my accent? Was it because of my pace? Was it because of my metaphor wasn't clear enough? And now we're just focusing on one area, one point, where now I'm extracting a valuable, meaningful, relevant feedback to me, and you feel like you're contributing to me as well. And I'm making it very easy for you, right? Get uncomfortable before we can be comfortable. Absolutely, Melvin. That's what it comes with the feedback. And here's my advice on that comment as well. It's not that comfortable to navigate through feedback conversation at work. And I totally get it. And we've all been through it. It's just not easy. Emotions are entering the stage. One of the advice that I always share around that is start practicing at home. Because it's it's safer environment for you. You're doing it with the people that you love the most. You're doing that with the people that you trust the most. Sometimes it still feels uncomfortable to start working on your receiving feedback skills or requesting feedback skills or positive feedback skills. Absolutely. But it's better to do it that way. Because what you're going to do is you're going to start creating a different habits that you can then bring into the workplace. Most of our days is run through habits. And if you have delivered feedback in several ways, in a particular way, if you have been part of the feedback environment where feedback was delivered and shared in a very particular way, then you can't change it overnight. And it becomes your default response, default ways of sharing it, receiving it, requesting it. All that is just habitual almost. How to change that? Well, you need to override that habit. You need to change your habit and practice it more frequently. Your home is one of your best practice places. And I found it very helpful, very supportive when I do that, especially with my kids. My older son, Nathan, is 17 in the next month. Xavier is tomorrow 10 years old. And I find it that practicing my feedback skills with them helps me a lot. Because the more I do that, it's not only that I'm creating a better relationship with them, but I also practice something new differently, and I'm creating a new feedback habits. What I also do is I do something that is tremendously important when it comes to feedback conversation. Right at the beginning, I've mentioned that we tend to respond to feedback differently depending on the level of the trust that we have with the person who shares the feedback with us. And here's the very important part, guys. Every feedback conversation that you're part of, every time you're sharing the feedback, it will either add or detract from the shared pool of trust. Depending on how you're handling it, and depending how people perceiving you, and I'll be talking about it a lot in the next session about the perception. not the intention, but the perception when we're sharing feedback. And what are the mistakes that we tend to make that screwing up our perception, how we are coming across, how we're showing up in a feedback conversation. But back to the trust. Each feedback conversation either adds to it or depletes from that shared pool of trust that we have, depending how you're handling it. So the more positive feedback experience I can have with you, the more trust I build, meaning my future conversation will become easier. The more feedback conversation that I do, that I share from the place where I'm not really emotionally ready for it, or I'm not coming across as a supportive parent, supportive managers, I'm going to detract from that trust, from that shared pool of trust, meaning my next feedback conversation will be more difficult with you. And I'm also making it more challenging for other managers. So practicing at home creates that a better, healthier habits. Positive feedback, guys, is one of your best ones. In fact, what I'll do next week, next Sunday, next feedback live Q&A, I'll dedicate it to a positive feedback. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth around how to share positive feedback in a very meaningful way and impactful way. Because as I've mentioned, your feedback can save you as a recognition, right? Very inexpensive recognition. And doesn't take much time. Within 5-10 seconds, you can make a huge, huge difference. So that's going to be a topic for the next week. You can also use positive feedback as your coaching tool, very powerful coaching tool. And so I always advocate to double down on positive feedback. If you are so driven to improve feedback culture within your organization, I almost begging you, make positive feedback part of your strategy. Look at the feedback from a holistic way and change the objective from I need to get better at delivering feedback into I need to create more positive feedback experiences. I need to change people's relationship with feedback conversation. They existing perceptions that mostly is negative. We need to change that. And if you make that your goal in 2021, or maybe within your first 3 to 6 months, that changes your entire strategy and the tools that you use in the workplace, just like with the slow elevator problem that I've mentioned. We're shifting, we're changing, we're solving a different problem and achieving a different objective. And all of a sudden, all the tools are different. So like I said, let's park away how to deliver feedback better and spend next few months on changing the relation that we have with the feedback. And positive feedback, guys, is your one of the best tool. And we all need a bit more positivity in our life after 2021. So after 2020, 2021 didn't really start that well, right? So that's my ask for you. I'm just checking, guys, my notes. What else I wanted to cover today if there are no more questions? And it seems to be no more questions. What I'll do is I'll log in quickly to my Facebook, because what I noticed is that sometimes my StreamYard doesn't show all the comments from my Facebook stream. And I don't want to miss any questions because this is live Q&A after all, right? So I want to get it right, but it doesn't seem like there are any questions on Facebook. Okay, so if you don't have any further question, guys, I'll be slowly wrapping up this session. Next week, the theme, more likely not, the theme will be a positive feedback. And all I'll be doing, I'll be asking you guys, are there any specific topics that you'd like me to cover? And each week, I'll be sharing some polls. You can always DM me with your questions and concerns. I will answer them. If you'd like me to do it anonymously, I'll do it anonymously, absolutely. Some feedback challenges are really sensitive, and there is no need to mention names, especially publicly, right? Now, those live Q&A sessions, guys, are every Sunday. And my thinking behind that is, as you are preparing for your next week, next working week, you may have ahead of you some feedback conversations that will be challenging to you, that you're not necessarily sure how to approach them. And you want to deliver in the best possible way, as we all do. Sunday, my Sunday live Q&A session, I hope it will be your opportunity to ask certain questions so I can prepare you ahead of the next week and answer your questions, your concerns. But I also be talking about things that I want to speak around feedback conversation. So next week, positive feedback will be definitely that one. Meanwhile, guys, if you're up for more tools and tips around feedback conversation, follow hashtag FWordCoach. My every single content is marked that way, so you can find a lot of that. I also have a podcast called Coaching Leaders, when my sole goal is to help managers becoming a better coaching leaders. When I launched my podcast, I imagined myself back in my early management days when I had so much passion to change the world, when I wanted to be the best possible leader. But it's not always possible to do that without the support. In fact, it's impossible to do without the support. And we're not always having that mentor-like leaders, managers around us. So I always think, how can I reach out to managers who want to make a difference, who want to become better leaders, but they don't necessarily know how to do that because they don't have that coach-like leader. So my podcast is dedicated to do exactly that. And what I do is I live stream the sessions as well. So my next live interview is on Wednesday. It's in 3 days' time. From the top of my head, I think it's 6 p.m. GMT. I need to double check how there definitely is going to be a lot of content around it. And the topic is super important because it's about curiosity. It's about a meta skill that is going to be super important, especially for years to come. Right now, it's important, but the way it's all predicted, how the workplace will move forward, curiosity and problem solving will top the chart of the must-have skills. And so on Wednesday, I'll be having a conversation with Dr. Chantal about curiosity, how to reignite the curiosity within ourselves, how to lead your team with curiosity as one of your main tools, guys. So that's on Wednesday. Live stream. Anything else I wanted to mention? No. Podcast, weekly Q&A, hashtag. Oh, so that's it for now, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate you. I hope that you found it very valuable. Please, if you do have any questions afterwards, if you do have any questions meanwhile, send me them. If you have any suggestions, how can I make it better, more valuable to you, message me. I love receiving feedback. I love to hear what can I do better. I'm feedback savvy. I'm feedback junkie, actually. But there isn't that much feedback that I'm receiving right now. So what I would like to know from you in terms of feedback is, how can I make this session more engaging and valuable to you? If you're tuning into a live Q&A session, what you are expecting from somebody who's hosting it, that will help me guide my format and my approach to tailor it and to create a more value, guys, for you. That's it for now, guys. I'll wish you a great Sunday on purpose. And until the next Sunday live Q&A, see you later, guys. Wednesday is a podcast live stream. Take care, guys. Have a great day on purpose. Oh, and then habits from through the cycle of learn, practice, apply, then repeat. Absolutely, Andrea. Your question just popped in on my feed. I absolutely agree with you. We got to create those habits. And just like I've mentioned earlier on, if we do that in a safe environment, whether it's your home or even within your working environment, you have few people that you have a better relationship with others, that you're connecting at different level than with the others. Start practicing there, create those habits, walk away from it and think, how did I feel when I delivered that feedback? What were my thoughts? What were my focus point of that conversation? What was my intention? And how did it went? And I found it very helpful for me personally. When we have this great intention and then we don't really prepare and the whole conversation changes its trajectory. And there's one conversation that always serves me as a personal reminder. And that was with my son. He was in his secondary school at that time. And I had a phone call from school that he didn't do his homework. And so as a parent, I want to have a conversation not about not doing the homework, but about commitment and attitude. That was my plan. And because I didn't prepare for it, I felt overly confident. I entered the conversation ad hoc without any preparation. And my intention of having a conversation around commitment, around your own responsibilities and your attitude towards your responsibility, not necessarily homework as a school, that would be just as a tool. I shift the conversation into why did you do your homework? And when I finished the conversation, I was like, this is not what I wanted, but this is what it happened. As Andrea said, learn, practice, apply, repeat, repeat, repeat. I've learned from this experience that I need to prepare a little bit more, stop being overconfident, and really be clear. What's my intention from this conversation? What's the learning and the lesson that I want to send to my son or my employee on the back of this conversation? Because what I found from my experience is that when we start having this conversation, emotions are slightly raising up. The topic is changing. The focus point is changing. The whole narrative is changing. What we wanted to achieve is no longer being achieved. In fact, sometimes we're taken into the more negative side. So yes, Andrea, learn, practice, apply, and then repeat, repeat, repeat. Walk away from it, see what you've learned from it, and try something different next time. It's going to take a time. It's going to take practice, guys, because what you are asking yourself to do is to change the habits that you've created over decades and being exposed to feedback conversation delivered in certain way for decades, from our childhood to our employment to even our personal lives. There is always this authority-driven feedback. There's always this pointing fingers type of feedback style that we are on the receiving end for years and becomes our default. So what you're really asking yourself is to change your habits that you have formed or been exposed to for decades, for years at the very least. So be patient with yourself and start practicing small. And like I've mentioned, do it at home, doing at most those that you love the most, trust the most, and at work, start slowly doing it with the people that you connect the most with. It's going to create a more safety net around yourself, and you're going to benefit from a bit more. Alrighty, guys. Thank you, Andrea, for dropping in this comment. I really appreciate that. That gave me something else to talk about, which is always great, guys. So if that's it, I'll be finishing the session for now, guys. And until next Sunday, next live Q&A, 2:30 p.m. See you guys. Take care and have a good day on purpose.